And here we all are. Good morning. And Temple, it's a joy to have you here. And you and I are going to cover things we both thought about. What strikes me as I looked at all of the notes that Chris had made and that I had made, I realized it was a journey you and I took together. You were growing up a baby, but I was also growing up. I was only 20 when you were born, and now that I have grandsons older than that, I see that 20 isn't very old, and I didn't know very much. But what I'd love to say, first of all, that I always have treasured is your desire, Temple, to join us. You always wanted to join. You wanted to learn to talk. And
I remember the frustration of not being able to get my words out. I knew what I wanted to say, but just couldn't get those words out. And that was an extreme frustration.
Do you see that in other children?
Yes, there's different types of speech problems. And I have observed this. There's three basic ways that you can have problems with speech. My problem was getting speech out was my main problem. Then another problem is auditory processing. I had a little bit of this. When the grown-ups talked super fast, it went into gibberish. And when they slowed down, I could hear them. And then you got the echolalic kid, where they yak out a whole television script or a movie script, but they have no idea what it means. So this is sort of the three different ways that speech can have problems.
Well, but always right from the start, you not only wanted to talk, but you engaged in talk that made sense. You didn't do any of those things. You joined in, and very soon, at a very young age, you joined in with jokes. You understood them, and a lot of children that I've seen on the spectrum don't understand jokes.
You know what? I didn't even realize that as a little kid I was doing jokes. I can remember a very frustrating incident when I was 5 in Mrs. Cole's kindergarten class, and we had a little assignment where you had to mark down all those pictures that began with B as in beautiful. And I marked the suitcase down as B because in our house they were bags. And the teacher didn't give me enough time to explain why I marked the suitcase with a B. So that's an important thing. Got to give these kids time to respond.
Well, and you know what? I'm a great believer in questions. It would have given you time if the teacher had said, what do you mean when you say B? And you would have said, she didn't ask you that.
No, she did not.
So you need that space in there. But what I have also always treasured is you knew what was expected of you. And that, too, I don't see all children do. And you were ready to be consistent with the other children. I do think it's important that both home life and school life match for children, so that what you learn at school matches with what you're doing at home. And I'm aware that all of the children in the neighborhood, all of you lived by pretty much the same rules. And that made it a lot easier. I think of you joining the other children, and I'd love to hear you talk about that, because you wanted to join them, and you did join them.
The rules were the same at home and school. The temper tantrum was no television for one night. If I went over to the Woods house, I was expected to have table manners. The rules were the same. Another way that I joined in with a lot of the other kids is I was good at doing a lot of craft kind of projects. Other kids found that was interesting. I wanted to do things with the other kids.
So Temple, why do you think that is when we have such an issue with so many parents come to me and say, I want my child to make friends, and they can't seem to find a way for their child to make friends? Do you have any recommendations for them, or what would you tell families when they come to you with that?
Well, I had a lot of friends, especially when I was older. Teenage time was horrible, who shared interests. Horseback riding, electronics lab, things where there's a shared interest in something kind of specialized. It could be art. It could be the school play. When I was in college, I even got teased until I went in the school talent show and worked on that. Again, that is shared interest. Get these kids into things like Boy Scouts, you know, raising, you know, an animal for 4-H, or art, or theater, or dance class, or music lessons, something they can do with other people, like band or choir.
But when you were little, do you think, you said you knew the kids liked crafts and you were good at crafts, and so how did you figure that out, that they were good at crafts, that they liked those crafts, and that you were good at it? I mean, if you couldn't have done that yourself, how could a parent have stepped in and helped? Because I think your mom introduced you to a lot of the crafts. Seems like you guys were always doing stuff.
Absolutely, and a lot of kids aren't doing enough stuff. They're getting addicted to video games. But I talked to one really enterprising mom. She had a young son who was addicted to Minecraft, that video game, building game online, and she went to the lumberyard and got a bunch of wooden blocks cut up, had the kids sand them and paint them in the Minecraft colors, and then they had Minecraft blocks for the driveway, and that was a big hit with the neighborhood kids.
Okay, so the parents have to kind of step in and do the part that the child couldn't do for himself. You were able to figure some of that stuff out on your own, but if your child doesn't, you kind of have to step in and think like a child.
I think part of the problem today is, you know, I was raised in the 50s, and kids just did all kinds of games outside where they make up games. And today, you've got, kids are not doing those sorts of things. So there's less opportunity to figure it out.
But one of the things that you did, because I remember you saying, that you had to learn to play the games by the other kids' rules, or they wouldn't let you play with them.
That's right.
And you figured that out, and you did it. You played by their rules. But you also contributed to the games, what I think of top of the list, with a kite, the bicycle kites. How'd you work on that? What brought that to your mind?
Well, I was out riding my trike one day, and there was a big red paper that some big cupcake or something had been wrapped in, a round red paper flying around. So I thought, well, that'd be fun to fly behind my trike. And so I tied it behind my trike with thread. It crashed. Then I taped a piece of crepe paper on it, and I developed how to make the kites. And I spent quite a lot of time figuring out how to make them out of heavy art paper, thread, and crepe paper. And they had to be made just right, or they didn't work. And the other kids got interested in that, and then I made the kites for the other kids. But the first thing I had to do is I had to develop a kite that actually would fly, and that took some time.
Well, so I do remember you racing your bike around the neighborhood, pedaling hard, because you had to make that bike go faster in order for the kite to fly up.
Yeah, you have to pedal fast, but you also have to have a kite that's weighted right, made right, or it doesn't fly at all. It either won't take off or it just crashes.
So, you know, part of that was just your desire to problem solve stuff. You like doing that. That's like something you really enjoy doing. But did anyone else step in and help you, siblings, your parents, or did you just work on that by yourself?
Well, I made the kites myself.
Okay.
A lot of time making them, and then when I started flying them behind my trike and they worked, the other kids got interested in that. You see, then a shared interest thing kind of developed.
And well, the other thing you all shared was doing plays.
Yes.
And I do remember it came out of your seeing me in a play and dressed up as a mermaid.
Well, I remember that.
Do you remember that? And you
yes,
thought, nobody else's mother dresses up like a mermaid. And immediately you got home, you wanted costumes, and you wanted makeup, and you wanted to do shows.
Well, this brings up the whole
kids joined.
Important thing of exposing kids to different things. I got exposed to theater, so that got me interested. I think one problem we got today is kids aren't getting exposed to enough stuff like that to get interest. I remember you really well, and it was a green sequined tail you had.
But I do remember once it started, the other kids wanted to be in the play too.
That's right. That's right.
And I think you're right. You have to offer different exposure to children.
Right.
Okay, so one thing I want to throw in here, because you know, nowadays we have so many therapies out there for children, and so many things that parents have their kids involved that are therapeutic and supposed to help them. But there wasn't all that when you were young, Temple. I mean, there was limited therapy before you went to school. You had some speech therapy, but it looked like your mom, when she saw there was an interest, your mother, Eustacia, would just pick up on that and go with you guys with it. She didn't, even if it wasn't going to go anywhere, she gave it a shot.
Mother was a very creative person. I can remember doing all kinds of things, like we inflated balloons, put paper mache on them, and made these heads for Halloween. I mean, just all kinds of craft things. You know, kids are not getting exposed to enough of those sorts of things today.
And why do you think that is? Do you have any, even with the videos, I mean, I did stuff like that with my children, and again, they didn't have videos with just coming out. But do you think it's because the emphasis is now on you're supposed to be doing this, this, and this, and this with your child with autism, rather than you should be doing what's following their lead or doing what's family fun? I mean, have we lost that idea that it's okay to do fun things with your child?
Well, if you learn from, you know, learning how to make things. I recently saw some normal kids the other day that their motor skills were horrible. They didn't even know which way to hold a knife when they were cutting their food, because I don't think they'd ever use scissors to make paper snowflakes, things that I did in second grade. And these kids were quite a bit older than second grade.
Okay, so it's just that, and a lot of that, yeah. Go ahead.
What I think of in the school that you went to, they taught both sewing and carpentry.
Yes.
Which in a way, in a strange way, are very much the same. The difference is in sewing, it's just a soft cloth. And in carpentry, the wood is stiff. But you have to figure out how to join things together.
That's absolutely right. And kids are not doing things like sewing, cooking, woodworking, you know, even making things with cutting up paper and gluing it and stapling it. Kids are not making things. And I think, you know, making things teaches a lot of important things. One thing it teaches is problem solving. When I made my kites that I flew behind my bicycle, I had to do a lot of experimentation to get a kite that would really fly correctly.
Now that's true. The first kites fell.
They did not work. And then I figured out how long a tail to put on it. If I had a piece of thread between the kite and the crepe paper tail, that worked better than taping the crepe paper right to the kite. I experimented with a lot of stuff like that. I had bird kites. I experimented with stiffening the wings with adhesive tape just the right way. There was a lot of experimentation until I got a kite that really worked.
You know, I'm thinking that maybe we need to take the parents out and teach them how to do these things again so they can go home and do them, because I think it's a lost parenting skill to sit down and do creative art with your child, or go out and build forts with your child, or do the plays in the theater. I think we've lost that with two working parents and all the emphasis on therapy. And maybe that's what we need to do for workshops.
But also, even friends that I have of my age never learned to sew.
That's right.
And I don't know why. Why do we drop that?
Well, I think dropping all the hands-on classes out is really, really bad. I mean, right now we have a huge shortage of auto mechanics, electricians, you know, a lot of the different skilled trades. Wouldn't be for every kid on the spectrum, but there's certain kids on the spectrum where auto mechanic would be the perfect job, but they're not going to get interested in it if they're never exposed to it.
And I think, that is a key. Yeah, Eustacia, just for a minute, could you talk about Mia Montaigne, who is Joe Mantegna's?
I see you put the name up there, and people are going to wonder who she is. Joe Mantegna, who's the television actor that you all know so well. He and Arlene have their oldest daughter, Mia, is autistic, and quite severely autistic. And wonderful what they have accomplished and what Mia has accomplished. And Arlene has always said, well, we're gypsies. We go wherever the job is, and we stay there. And Mia has learned to do that. It's a very different lifestyle from the lifestyle, Temple, that you grew up with. But Mia understands it. She can go anywhere in any plane. She can manage in a strange hotel. And I've seen them do this, and I'm impressed. It's a whole totally different life.
Well, it gets to the point where she's been in so many hotels and so many planes that it just becomes normal to stay in different hotels and planes. And then you get to know your hotel brands. So once you get in the room, it's like all the same.
Yeah.
Yes.
So again, it's that exposing children to a lot of things, even if they may not want to be exposed to it or not show any inclination toward it. You never know. You know, your mom said you were very good at sewing, Temple,
Yes,
at
I
one
was.
point.
I loved embroidery. Our school had embroidery class for third graders. I really liked doing embroidery. And then when I was in fourth grade, Mother got me this wonderful Singer Sew Handy little toy sewing machine that actually sewed. It's one of my favorite things. You see, that's making things.
But even though, okay, and my point of this is, even though you were very good at something, it didn't turn out to be your passion, which I think often we see a child good at something and we assume that, oh, that's going to be the passion that carries them through life. But it might just be part of the passion. Problem solving, and sewing is a lot of problem solving too. So the passion that you ended up with animals and not sewing, I don't know, have you sewed lately? You probably haven't sewed in a while.
But when I worked with animals, I designed a lot of things made out of steel and concrete, and that's sort of sewing with the stiff material. So you have that same skill. Again, I got interested in horses and cattle because in high school I was exposed to them at the school and at my aunt's ranch. You know, I have a saying, you've got to show kids interesting stuff to get them interested in interesting stuff.
Right.
I was reading an article in Science magazine about a forestry biologist, and she got exposed to nature when she was a kid on some family trips, and that's what got that passion going.
Yeah. So before we go there, I just wanted to put this picture up. This is a lovely picture of you when you were about 9, and your mother is also in the picture, but I chopped you right out, Eustacia. I just took you right out of it.
I know where you found that. It's a charming picture.
And that was a picture, what was that for? That was for the newspaper?
It was for the newspaper, and it was for Mother's Day. And I remember Rose Walsh from the Boston Globe called me up and said, I'd like to come out and take a picture of you with your children for Mother's Day. And the picture, I've always treasured it because it's the only one that I have of all 4 children together. And
really?
Yes, it's particularly nice of Temple. And Temple, you see, that also brings up the scratchy petticoats. Now, you've always said how much the petticoats scratched and itched, but you always wore them, and you never told me that they scratched. If you had, I'd have said, you don't have to wear them.
Well, there was a thing
you looked cute in them, and did you know you looked cute in them?
I knew that people liked the way I looked, and I figured out a way to deal with the worst scratchiness. You know, I'd wear, I had those undershirts with the straps that go over the shoulders, and I found if I tucked that into my underpants, that would protect me from the worst scratchiness from around the waist. And I had figured out how to do that.
But you knew your mom liked how you looked?
Oh, yeah, I knew that I was expected to get dressed up.
But I also wonder, didn't you looked in the mirror. Were you aware that you looked cute? Did it satisfy you, the way you looked?
Well, I knew that's what people wanted. I can remember when you had me and my brothers and sisters be party hosts and hostesses at your parties, and we had to put our good clothes on. And I was proud of the fact that I got to do this grown-up thing of meeting your dinner guests, shaking hands with them. And that was another thing that taught social rules. And it taught him to my brother, too, even though he hated it. He said that when he grew up and he got a job at a bank, it helped him talk to the upper vice presidents and enable him to go up the corporate ladder and become a senior vice president.
It's true, and he told me he had other friends of his who never could get past the first interview because they didn't know how to talk to an older man. And I don't think that children realize, or maybe, I doubt if you realize, that of course if you do that, because other parents were doing the same thing with their children, that the parents will play out the role. You introduce you to a parent, and they will say, what are you doing in school? What grade are you in? And what's your favorite subject? They'll carry out their side of the role.
That's right.
And I grew up in the 50s, and yes, I was taught to curtsy and to shake hands, and because my mother had a lot of musician friends who were classical musician friends who expected you to know how to act in front of an important person in her mind, and I guess they were. And I taught my children. I don't know if I did as well, though. I think they still are relatively polite. They do open the door for you, so that's good.
No, I will defend your boys. They have perfect manners.
So, but
I am aware of that.
It came from a lot of when they would go to get in the car and hadn't opened the door for the grandmother, they'd get whacked in the back. So they kind of learned in real situations.
Through the door first.
Well, I can remember you used to cue me. If I forgot to say please or thank you, you'd say, you forgot to say, and then you'd pause. And then I'd say either the please or the thank you.
Well, there are all the little rules that we have. You see, a lot of these rules apply to all children.
Absolutely.
To all of us. They're what keep us comfortable with each other.
Well, they enable people to get along. Courtesy rules help people to get along.
Courtesy rules, I like that term. Yeah, just the courtesy rules. It kind of lets you know how you get on. I mean, how would we get through a door if we didn't know who should go first?
Well, and then they vary some in other countries. Because I went to China, and I couldn't believe the pushing and shoving, getting on and off a plane. I was in an aisle seat. This guy in the window climbed over me and this other passenger. But there's other things in China that be considered rude, but pushing and shoving, getting on and off a plane was okay. I have to say I was rather shocked.
So, and your mom talks a lot about the culture and the cultural influence of that autism has on the culture. Maybe you could address that a little bit, Eustacia.
Well, I feel that we're isolating autism. I mind the picture of autism as a single little puzzle piece sitting out there all alone. It isn't. It's a puzzle, an entire puzzle, and we are part of the puzzle. It's not us and them, it's us and us. And if we're not looking at how we connect to children who are having trouble connecting, and where we are having trouble with them, why then the connections, the friendship breaks down. It doesn't work. And I think we could work on that better than we're doing it now. We're not looking at, we're in a culture right now that's changing quite a lot. And we don't know what, pretty soon it'll settle down and there'll be a pattern, the one that Chris and I have both talked about that you grew up in, which was the pattern was very established. But it's not established now. And part of this is the parents are not looking at their feeling about the child they don't always understand.
Well, I think another thing we've got to remember in autism, it's such a big spectrum. You're going from somebody who's just a mild Asperger's that might be a computer programmer, Tesla who invented the power plant and be labeled autistic today. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got a very severe kid that can't do any normal things. You can't go to restaurants with them or football games with them, and it's all got the same name. I think the DSM-5 changes have been really bad.
Well, I think they're very confusing to people.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Temple. The fact that we no longer can differentiate between different levels of the impact of autism on a person really doesn't help parents or teachers. It makes it more confusing for them, and you use totally different strategies on a child because I work with a lot of lower functioning children, which is probably not a very pleasant term to be called. And some of them, the parents, I would say the parents are the ones that always seem to pull those kids through. I give a lot of credit to the parents for either insisting the schools help their child or what they do at home really impacts how that child's going to function and where they're going to live. But it's very different from what you would expect of a child with a high-functioning child, where you would make some demands that you couldn't do it with another child.
Well, one of the problems I'm seeing in a lot of conferences, especially fully verbal kids around 10 or 12 years old, is they're almost over-sheltered and protected. The parents are doing everything for them. Parents are doing all the talking for them. I remember talking to one set of parents in the airport. They had a 15-year-old, good at doing video auditing, and he was just sitting in his room all summer. And it turned out that there were some people at the church that needed some video being audited. They were real good friends with the pastor. And I said, have your son go down to the church office and edit that video of the church picnic. And the kid was perfectly capable of doing this. And Mom kind of broke down and said, I can't let go. You're talking about going to a church office 1 mile down the road. The pastor's office, they're best friends with you. You know, this is a much smaller thing. Because when I was 15, I went out to my aunt's ranch, you know, at the other end of the country.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. When do you let them go, Temple? And that's a big thing that when I'm working with families, there'll come a time when I'll say, nope, this time they get detention. This time they did something, and yes, they've got it. And they say, well, they'll freak out with detention. They won't be able to do it. I say, but they're 12 now, and now is the time you've got to say, you did it. You know you did it, and I can't go in there and protect you from the consequences anymore. But it's a real spot. I mean, you went out to the ranch, and I think I can go down there. A picture about that. There you are. I don't know if you're at the ranch there, but you look really good.
That's in New Hampshire school.
That's at Hampshire School.
We'll pretend it's at the ranch. But you went to the ranch, and Eustacia, what did you say when she went to the ranch? What did you tell her?
I kept making deals with you, Temple. Remember? When we looked at schools, we went to see 3 different schools, and I said, you can pick which one of the 3 schools you'd like to go to. Now, I didn't say to you, where would you like to go to school? I didn't offer you any other choices. I just gave you 3 choices.
Yeah.
And you picked Hampshire School, and it was the right school for you. And the same thing out there in the ranch. I said this ranch was the sister of my second husband, Ben Cutler. That's where I get the name Cutler. And Ben and I had been out there and stayed, and we both said, we think Temple would just love this. And I went home, told you about it, and you said, no, I want to stay in the school. I like riding the horses, and I want that to be my summer. And I said, okay, could you manage 1 week there alone? It'll be, in those days it was easier to fly. You could go right to the gate. And I said, I will take you up to the gate. And I knew that Anne on the other end could go right to the gate. So if I knew that there was nothing scary where you'd be left alone in a strange airport. I said, can you do the week? And you said, yes, I can manage a week. And I said, at the end of a week, if you want to come home, you can come home.
And how did you feel about it, Temple? What were you going through at that time?
Well, you see, I had a lot of anxiety attacks. So anything that was changed made me nervous. But, you know, I got out there and I loved it. You see, the thing we've got to fight is the recluses in the room thing. I'm seeing too many recluses in the room playing video games. Again, an important thing is no surprises. I knew about the ranch long before I went. I'd seen pictures of it. I had talked to Ann on a phone. It was not a surprise. You know, that's one thing you do really need to be careful of.
Now, I have a question from a mom. She just texted in, and she asked, should her child gets frustrated very quickly? Let me read it. My child experiments. He gets quickly frustrated. How do you encourage experimentation in those moments?
How old a child is this?
Let me, hopefully she can hear us, but how old is your child? Let's see. Let's see if she'll answer me on that.
How I would deal with it would depend some on his age, what he was doing, that he was getting frustrated. There's a situation where I might help him a little bit, but then I want him to work on the thing himself. I don't even know what the thing is that he's working on. All right, let's say it's cutting out a paper snowflake. So he might be having some problems with the motor control of the scissors. So I might cut part of it out for him, and I say, okay, now I want you to cut a little bit of it. That's the same way Mother taught me to read. I work a lot better in specifics as to what was he experimenting on. I don't even know what he was doing, and I don't know how old he is. I need a little more information, but you let them make some mistakes, but then there's a point where you've got to help. Otherwise, they get too frustrated and just give up.
Okay, well, maybe Rachel, Rachel, if you could send us more information, that might help. And then Chris asked a question, how do we get kids to try and experiment with things when the world tells them they can't? And I'm not sure we need to be listening to the world. That would be my opinion on that. But
They would simply spur me on to say, yes, I can. And I wouldn't take that. I wouldn't take no for an answer.
Although it is harder now, Temple, one of the things that parents face is the schools setting up roadblocks for children. And it's not to badmouth schools because they do a wonderful job with many, many children. But they'll say, well, that child needs to go into a self-contained, Harrison is a case, Eustacia knows Harrison. He was told he had to go into a self-contained room for children with autism, and because he wasn't capable of being in any other room besides that. And his mother said no. She put him in the general ed classroom and actually pulled him out of special ed and went in and helped him. And he's going to high school, I think, now. So
well, you sometimes just need a little help. The thing that's happening now is things are getting so bureaucratic. And the other problem is people overgeneralize about autism. I would ask, first of all, I need to know the kid's age, how good his speech is, and what problems was he having in the classroom. I don't even know what the problem was before I can figure out how to fix it.
What it makes me think of is a school in Yakima, Washington, where it was particularly middle school, so this is maybe 8 years old. What they did is instead of any kind of special class, one of the class, they could sign up, each of them, for one day to be at the shadow for that boy. And they loved it, and the boy loved it. They each learned about each other. And that's the way they pulled that boy into the class with them. The kids
that's the sort of stuff that, there's simple things that you can do. I think sometimes people just overcomplicate the problem.
I agree.
And then you have some kids where they can get sensory overloaded. Well, then you say they can go out in the hall for a 2-minute break then.
That's right. I like the teacher who said, I can see when he's getting wound up. And so she said, I assign him to go around with the janitor and empty all the wastebaskets. And he comes back, sits down, everything's fine. He just needed that exercise, that motion.
Right. That's right.
And, well, one of the points that I'm really dying to go over here, because I know you won't tell the story, but I'm going to tell it. But that is about who has a self-starter and who stays determined, and how do you deal with the unexpected. Now, you built your cattle equipment, and this was before the days of Women's Lib. I haven't got the exact date of when you did this, but the men tried to destroy your equipment. They didn't care that you were autistic. They didn't care that the company had spent thousands of dollars on the equipment. They cared that you were a woman and you would produce something that was better than what they could produce. And you stood guard over that machinery that you had built. And it took you went and stayed, you told me, in a crummy little motel off in the middle of nowhere. And you got up every day and went there early in the morning and guarded your work. So they could.
And there was another engineer from the steel fabrication company, and we took turns guarding, but we were there from 6 o'clock in the morning till 9:30 at night. But we did have to do bathroom breaks. There was another man there that worked for the company that built the equipment, and we took turns guarding it for an entire week. There were meat hooks that got put in things that the only way they could get there was deliberate.
Well, It was incredibly persistent and brave of you at a time before Women's Lib. And you had to deal with the unexpected.
Well, the thing that was hard for me to deal with is how somebody could, like wreck their own company's equipment. That was illogical. And I finally had to understand it. Sometimes, I used to say engineering's easy. It's the people problems that are hard.
Yep. but you did it. What do you do when you run up? I remember a time here in New York when one of the animal rights people, PETA, is that the organization I'm thinking of?
I don't know.
Well, he stood up against you and about that we shouldn't eat animals. And you, again, you stood right up to him and you said, "Sir, let us just agree to disagree. Now I have dealt with you, and now you sit down, please, and I'm going to go on with my talk."
And the other thing I will say is there's some things that we can agree on, like certain, acts of cruelty, that would be done, that were done to an animal, that there's, okay, we'll disagree on eating meat or whether we should be raising them for meat, but there's other things we could agree on. Like, for example, how you handle animals should be improved. I think we could both agree on that.
Well, it was brave, and it must have caught you caught me off guard. I didn't know whether you'd ever dealt with something like that. Have you ever dealt with something like that since?
Oh, yeah, you deal with that kind of stuff all the time. And one of the problems we have today is the internet you get radicals on any issue. I don't care what the issue is. Radicals right or left on any issue, and the internet's magnifying the voices of some people. They're just absolute total radicals.
And I think you both have experienced that because Eustacia, you've written a couple of articles that roused tremendous amount of controversy, and yet as time goes on, both of you have been not proven right, but people have come to see that yes, you're protecting the animals from something we're going to do, but making sure that we're doing it in an honorable way. And Eustacia, you're bringing up issues that are very important. And your other children,
the issues don't disappear.
Yeah, and I think your other siblings face things also. Someone had a question about your brothers and sisters, Temple, and I know that you seldom do talk about them, but you have a very good relationship with your family. I often see on Facebook with your family that you're Auntie Temp. Is that what they call you?
Yep, I have really good relations. One of the reasons I don't talk about them is they want their privacy. Other than to talk about just the most general sort of things that would be general principles with sibling relationships. Like when I was a little kid, it was hard for my sister when she was in high school to have a weird older sister. But I don't go much into it beyond that. But that would be true in many different situations.
I think that was true for my son. He often said that his brother was did not enhance his popularity at all because he said his brother was weird. Now, there was nothing wrong with either of them, but the younger sibling decided the older sibling wasn't good enough for him.
Well, even back in my ancient past, when I went to boarding school, my sister was already there, and she announced to me that I was not to speak to her. She was not going to acknowledge me as a sister, even though we had the same last name. And now, of course, years later, we are devoted to each other.
And I think people forget that as sibling relationships are very, very special. They go through a lot of what you went through probably in high school where they don't want to acknowledge you, don't admit that you're my brother. And but you're very close to your siblings now, and Eustacia, you're dear with your sister, and I am too. So, yeah. And my boys are very, very close. So,
and your boys are close.
Well, I had a great conversation with with one of my sisters who was trying to start up an interior design, and I have a independent consulting business for livestock, and the way you do a consulting client is the same, whether it's livestock or whether it's redecorating a house. Just how do you set up a business and things like that. I had a lot of conversations with her on that because I'm really interested in that. I'd like to see her do well on that.
Yeah. So I think one of the things families have said to me, Temple, and I kind of like, this is a definitely spontaneous response. They've said that the sibling should not be burdened with a sibling with a disability in any way. And I've always said that that's a sibling relationships. If one of your sisters got sick, I'm sure that you would go make sure she was taken care of. If So I often use that. I say, well, what if your sister who has been typically developing at 60 gets cancer? Are you just going to say, well, I'm sorry, I don't want to be burdened with you?
Well, define what you mean by burdened. All right, let's think of a more specific example.
Okay.
where the parents put all the attention into the child with a handicap, and the sibling never gets to have any quality time with the parents. Okay, that's something that needs to be corrected, not the more normal stuff like whether or not somebody went to the hospital or they got cancer, or the sibling, the parents are spending so much time taking care of the child with the handicap that the young sibling at age 10 is doing all the cooking for the house. See, these are kind of specific examples of things that I would...
It turned the siblings into little helpers.
Yeah.
And they're not little helpers, they're children too. And I agree with you. We have to take care of children. And the one thing that I've recommended, because I think children will not always admit to their mother what they're finding difficult about an autistic sibling, because they know that it will upset their mother. And I think this is where a good counselor helps. The other thing, I think of the counselor that I liked the best on this, they also don't know how to put it into words. And I think of myself when I was young. I don't think I could have said in words what was difficult. I wouldn't have been able to find them. And this counselor, her solution to it was she had a huge doll house, and every kind of doll and furniture and ornament that you could put into a doll's house. She had this big collection. And she'd say to them, you can decorate the dollhouse the way you'd like to. She said the scenes they built told her where the trouble was. And nobody had to say it in words. They could do it better that way. And that was a good solution. Good way to deal with it.
I'm going to go back to some of the questions here. That some of them relate to what we're talking about. Some are just totally out. The child that we were discussing that gives up when he's trying to do something, she said he's 8. He'd be playing outside trying to make a slingshot, but giving up in just a few minutes, or playing inside and trying to build a Lego airplane, but not continuing because he can't find the color or the exact block. What do you think's going on there that we might be able to give this mom a little help?
Well, first of all, I want to make sure he doesn't have a motor coordination problem that might need some formal physical therapy, okay? Once I rule that out, then what I probably would do is give him, like on the Lego blocks, give him a little bit of help. Maybe before we start, we organize the Legos so that where all the different parts, he can find them easily. We might give him a little bit of help, and build part and say, okay, now you need to finish it, and gradually get him doing more and more. That's how I would handle that once I've ruled out some problem with motor skills.
So it's still the parents that need to kind of set these things up for success for a child when they introduce something new. And I think, I think your mom did a lot of that for you, Temple. I think she set things up.
She did.
Okay, because it always seemed like she was there making sure that the costumes were, if there was a problem, she would help you solve it. And it was...
Well, we did lots of making stuff. First of all, we had materials available. Old ripped up sheets were available to make things out of. We had crayons. We had art supplies. There were things available to make things out of. I had art paper to make my kites out of. They were not elaborate materials, but you have to have some things available.
Right.
I think you're right. And it's not always cuddly toys. You're right. I've forgotten. Sheets of colored art paper. There were packages you bought that had red, blue, and yellow paper in them.
And my other favorite material, since I was too young to use the scissors to cut the corrugated cardboard, were these thin pieces of poster board that were put in my shirt laundry and my father's shirts, and I'd take those out. And then my other materials were Scotch tape, half-inch adhesive tape. I got that out of the medicine cabinet. Cotton wool I got out of the medicine cabinet. And I had lots of watercolors and paint. And I always had materials available. Oh, and typing paper. Now today it's printer paper, but just regular like copier paper. There was plenty of that around. Plenty of the simple materials like that, tape and glue and scissors to make stuff out of.
So yes, and that was before we said children shouldn't be, the medicine cabinet needed to be locked. We had a tendency to let kids get into anything. Okay, I have another.
I had it drilled into me about not, looking at the bottle. And I had it drilled into me about safety, and you don't take anything. No, I never touched any of the stuff. I just touched the adhesive tape and the cotton wool. Now those things could have been put outside the medicine cabinet.
Right,
but
right.
I just sort of used the readily available things, but I'm seeing kids today, they've never even used paints. And these just simplest little kids watercolor paints. You're not talking about complicated or expensive things here. Copier paper, now it's copier paper.
I was in a classroom once.
Make stuff out of stuff like that.
And there was a teacher, and there was a child had very high functioning autism, and they had been doing something with paint. And at the end of it, the child had all these paints on a paper plate, little different, like little red, little blue, little yellow, whatever. And she started mixing them together. And of course, it was turning black. And she was so excited that this was happening. And the other children came over, and they were watching her, and they were so excited that it was happening too. Yes, and the teacher came over and she said, "You throw that away, you're making a mess."
No, you let them do it, because then you learn. If you mix yellow and blue together, you get green.
Yeah.
You get orange if you put red and yellow together. Kids learn that.
But I was heartbroken, because here it was, she was, the engagement, and also she didn't have a lot of friends, so it was like suddenly she was doing like you with the kites. Everybody was interested in what she was doing.
That's right.
And it was like, you're missing the big picture here, and who cares that she's making a mess? So that's part of it, too, needing to have something, like you have a set way of doing it, and you think that's how it should go, instead of letting the children take it away on their own. And I think we tend to restrict children a little bit more.
She discovered when she mixed the paints together that it all turned dark brown or black.
Yes.
She discovered how the colors
the first lesson, because that's... all colors mixed will all turn to black, and when you and actually the prism is sunlight, which is absolutely pure white. Hit it with a prism, and it turns into all the colors of the rainbow. So,
I was just remembering that and feeling kind of sick at heart when it happened. So. Here's a question. This is an interesting question from somebody, from Kobe. And I apologize if I said your name incorrectly, Eustacia, did you compliment Temple a lot? And how did Temple respond to compliments? And are they an effective strategy? And you have a lot to say about that, Temple, Eustacia, about over-complimenting children.
Well, I think I praised you, Temple, when I thought what you did was really good. Yes. But I think to praise kids when all they're doing is opening the door. There's a child next door. I live in an apartment building, in an apartment across the street, and this mother compliments her every time she hits the button to go up in the elevator. No. I don't think that's an extraordinary feat that deserves a compliment. But I do remember some pictures you did, and I saved them, and I bet I still have them. There were some things that each of you children did that I saved from your childhood, because I thought, these are really good pieces. And I think I complimented you, and I think I put... Yes. I thought I remembered putting a picture in a frame. A real frame. There was a difference between what got posted on the refrigerator and what got a real frame. That's right. And that meant a lot to me, seeing that picture I did of the wharf and the beach, put on the real frame on the wall in the bedroom. That was a real compliment. I wasn't complimented for being on time for dinner, but just the normal things like that. Well, that's it. The things there were exceptional things I did. And they were exceptional. Yeah. And I think to praise children for hitting the right elevator button. I agree with that.
I hope she's not listening.
I don't think so.
Temple, here's a good question, because I think that I believe you have an opinion on this. Someone said, Carol asked, how do you respond to a child who says, I can't help it, I have autism? It's not an excuse. There are specific things. If people talk too fast, maybe they can't hear, or they get in a noisy store and there's sensory overload.
So there's some specific things like that may have to do some, accommodations for, like get out of the store, don't go in the store when they're tired, for example. But you have to figure out how to work around the autism. You just can't have a blanket because I have autism. And also, I need to find out where is he pulling that excuse. So I need more specific information.
Okay. So maybe Carol can send us some more. But we hear that, I do hear little 12-year-olds, high-functioning 12-year-olds say, well, I can't help it. I have autism. And go, yes, you can help it. I realize you have to overcome a few things here, but yes, you can help it. You don't have to push the teacher out of the way. You can say, excuse me.
Exactly. You see, this is why I need to know what it is.
Yeah.
You might have a child with extreme sensory problems, and the noisy supermarket or the train station is just too much. That might be sensory. But just pushing the teacher, no, there's no reason. Autism's not an excuse for that.
But this brings up something that bothers me, and that is the mothers who speak up for their children.
Yes.
And these are a little bit older. I'm thinking of particularly one particular incident. The boy was probably, I don't know, somewhere between 16, 18 maybe at the most. And I asked him his name. I asked him where he was in school, what grade he was in. And his mother spoke up. I thought, I didn't ask you, I asked your son. Do you run into this?
Yes, all the time I run into that, all the time. And I'll say, let your son speak. These kids where the mom will ask in a conference, so my son has a question, and I'll say, I'll go over to him with a wireless and say, now your son needs to ask the question. And I've gotten these kids to talk in front of like 500 or 600 people, and then I kind of shush the audience down so they don't clap too fast, because you've got to give them time to respond. The wheels turn a little bit slowly. But I've gotten kids where mom was doing all the talking to talk to a whole big group of people on the wireless.
So, and this is not to criticize moms in any way. This is only to give them information that might be helpful to them, because I think when you're in that situation and you've been giving this child, doing the right thing as far as you know it for so long, it changes as they get older. So yes, maybe you did talk to your son when he was 5 or 6 or 7 because you didn't want to be uncomfortable. But suddenly, as we said before, there's that age where you have to say, now you're 12, let him try it. He'll be okay. And I'm okay. I'm not going to do anything to hurt your child. And the majority of people are not going to do anything to hurt your child.
No.
They're going to be patient. I have another question here, and this is just interesting for me as a behaviorist. It says, my son, 21, has so much potential, but behavior problems, yelling suddenly or striking out, keeps him from moving forward to work. Eustacia, how would you move forward in today's society with this? And then she says, he consistently has consequences. I want to address this one for just a second.
Yes.
But perhaps you need to look at those consistent consequences and see what he's trying to tell you when he's yelling or striking out. I think you might be missing some communication that he's using behavior for, and your consequences are not going to be effective. But what would you say, Temple, to someone like that?
Well, I got in a lot of trouble in high school for fighting in anger, and I switched to crying. I just about don't get angry now. I tend to cry. And anger gets you fired from a job. Crying, the meatpacking plants, I used to go hide in the electrical room because nobody would go in there, and I knew what not to touch. And I'd go in there because if I did in the restroom, people would see me. Or I'd go underneath the stairs, or I'd go out on the catwalk, someplace where people wouldn't see me. But I had to learn to control anger. And I've had mom say to me, well, my 16-year-old boy cries. I go, good. He's not going to end up in jail or end up losing a job.
But you also removed yourself, Temple.
Yes, I did. I removed myself. When some of this stuff, when some of the bad things happened in the plants, I would go hide. In each plant, I had places I could go where nobody could find me.
So that's important to teach your children that, to leave and deal with your emotions is something that you can do.
Well,
you don't have to stay there.
Walk around. If you're in the office building, just go outside and go walk around a tree or something. Just get away.
I worked with a young man with cerebral palsy who got very frustrated at the bank when they wouldn't wait on him, and it would take a long time. And then he would go outside in his wheelchair, and he'd just twirl around it and twirl around in it. And they called me, and they said, he's got to stop doing that. And I said, well, he really can't just go out and get angry or go out and, you know, do what other people, that's his way of releasing frustration. And he's out of the way. He's not hurting anybody. He's just kind of whirling around in his chair a few times, and then he comes back in and he's fine.
And he's doing it outside. He's not even doing it in the bank.
Right. Yeah, he was just doing it outside. But it made them uncomfortable. So, anyway,
I
did
come back to something that bothers me. We talk about where do we get thrown off by all of this? We're always fixing things up for those on the spectrum. But you're telling a story, Chris, there of
they
a
were
boy
uncomfortable.
who made the other people uncomfortable. That's why they wanted it to stop.
Yes, it had nothing to do with him.
It had nothing to do with him. And I think there's a certain amount of that in autism. We're always, look at that thing. Where'd you find those?
I'm sorry. Because we have 5 more minutes, and Temple, I just wanted to show you that the apple did not fall far from the tree, and you and your mom. And so there you are, both of you, same expression, same motion, and I love it because it's very much shows how mother and daughter that you are. And I think people forget this. I think they forget that the characters of an individual, Temple, you're very much a product of your family and your genetic makeup. You're not just somebody with autism. That's not all of you. You're a Grandin through and through, and Purvis too, I guess would be your maiden name.
Well, my grandfather on my mother's side was an MIT trained engineer, co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes. And when I was a very young child, we'd go over to Granny and Grandfather's house for Sunday dinner. I used to love to sit with Grandfather and ask him, why is the sky blue or why is grass green? And he'd explain it to me.
Yes. So, and I think we forget that a child with autism is one part of that child. And this picture, I think, is a great reminder of that you and your mom have a lot in common. And then to end it, you know, we have a few more minutes here, and maybe we should talk a little bit about neurology and how much is neurology, how much is character, and how much is learning through experience that influences a person. And I realize that's a whole nother topic. It would probably take an hour to do it. That could be continued.
And maybe we do. Because it's a many-sided problem.
Yes.
And we have to think of it in that way and say part of it is us as well. We are used to people who respond to us, and that's in our neurology, in the way we expect. And Temple, somehow you learned that. But there are many on the spectrum who can't do it and who haven't learned it or haven't been helped to do it, to comprehend. I'm fumbling now because I'm not quite sure how to find the words for it. But there's a lot we need to do together. We need to look at the space between us.
Well, what I've found, you know, of course, I do a lot of work in animal behavior. You get, okay, you've got cattle, they get wild when you handle them. How much is that the neurological makeup of the animal, and how much is learning? They are both really important. Environment and biology. It takes both. They work together.
Yes, it does.
So perhaps at the next time we could, you know, if you want to do this again, Temple, I know people would love to have you do it again. And it's an easy way to talk to a lot of people. I know we didn't get all your questions answered. I apologize for that. Here are some of Temple's writings. And do you have any new books coming out, Temple?
Well, I just came out with the update of Improving Animal Welfare Practical Approach. It's a textbook for students. It just came out this summer. And then Livestock Handling and Transport last year came out with an updated edition. Those are pretty much my academic books. And then my latest book that's not an academic book is The Autistic Brain. one of the things I talk about in there that I think a lot of people will find helpful with older individuals on the spectrum is jobs, different kinds of thinking, and things that would be good jobs for different kinds of thinking, like visual thinking or mathematics or highly word-oriented people.
Would you be interested in coming back and talking more about that? Because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I would.
And then Eustacia has her book, A Thorn in My Pocket, which is her family story, which talks about Temple growing up, and also has some new essays that are being put there on Amazon. There's short essays on autism that you can go in and everyone knows how to use Amazon.com, I hope. If you don't, it's not going away because I think I support that stock completely by buying things. And so we will continue to put up more essays as she's writing them. And Eustacia, you're writing a new book also?
Yes, I am. I'm working on the social history of autism because autism is very old and it's always been troubling to us. And the way in which I discovered when I began to look at the past, that we had a whole trail of how we've handled it. And we do it better now than we did long ago, because in the beginning they were considered changelings. I don't know if any of you know what a changeling is, but this is back for the old Celtic religions, the fairies, which is Celtic. The fairies have taken your child and they put one in its place that will look just like your child, but it won't speak and it will play tricks on you, and you must throw it on the fire and it will go back to its fairy home. Well, I think that solved the problem of autism. You don't have it.
Yes.
Yes. I think we don't do that anymore. But that's what started me on the road to looking at how historically have we looked at autism.
So, Eustacia, I'm going to ask you to wrap this up, and
well,
then we will end it. It is 11 o'clock, and we did quite a wonderful hour here. I enjoyed every minute of it. I hope I didn't interject too much. And
no, it was great, so that all three of us could talk. And Temple, I want to thank you very much for doing this. And yes, I would love to do it again if people would like to hear it again. And I have to tell everybody that it was your birthday. We had hoped to do it on your birthday, the 29th. And you couldn't quite make it back from Canada in time. So that's why we're now at the 31st instead. But God bless you, and on to another year.
Well, thank you. I was really good doing this. Really happy to do this.
Thank you.